Maya Ackerman teaches computational creativity and machine learning at San Jose State University. Her work has been featured on NBC Mock and New Scientist, and her research appears at top academic venues. Piero, who we all know, has a background in math, physics, AI, and cognitive science, but he's mostly a cultural historian now. His most recent books are Thinking About Thought, Intelligence is Not Artificial, and Human 2.0. But he's also written extensively about popular music. He's also the founder of both the Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous, also known as Lasers, and also this festival, the Life Art Science and Tech Festival. Meredith Trumbull is an artist and writer who has been artist in residence at the Complexity Sciences Center at UC Davis since 2011, and she teaches interdisciplinary studies at the San Francisco Art Institute. Her ongoing collaboration with UCD geobiologist Don Sumner, the interactive 3D art installation Dream Vortex, has been presented internationally. She's also the co-editor with Carissa Terranova, The Routledge Companion to Biology in Art and Architecture. And finally, we have Lisa Winter. Lisa Winter has been designing and building robots for 20 years and is a pioneer of the Internet of Things movement. She has competed in all US Robot Wars and BattleBots competitions since 1996, and she is currently developing a smart wearable baby monitor at Mattel. So thank you very much.
Okay, this light? Yes. Okay, I want to start with my provocative thing. I don't have a background in art, but I read a lot of art books, art magazines, and I really like art. But look at this. Okay, so these are famous art pieces that you find in art books. Okay, this made the history of art. I don't want to comment this one. Okay, so that was, things you find in art books. Now, this is done by neural network, artificial intelligence. In 2015, it was actually at Oxford. There was a researcher at Oxford that came out with this idea of asking neural networks, what are you learning? And neural networks display something that looks artistic. And then Google made it famous. Last year, there was an auction where actually some of these neural network made images were sold. So it is an artwork. You've probably seen this. They were widely publicized. Okay. So, my question for Meredith is, that one is art. Is this also art? I think a lot of people, lay people, who don't have a background in art, might prefer the last 3 slides.
Yes, they might indeed. So we want to spend a lot of time on this vexed question of what exactly is art, but I think we do need to set a little bit of a boundary here, and I'm going to propose that that art is a living thing, that it is neither in a particular object, neither is it in a particular interpretation or a mind interpreting, but the art is something which occurs in between the two. And so the question of whether this is art or not might have to do with the kind of conversation that I can have with it. If I look at the Bruce Nauman, for example, the fountain where the guy is spitting the water in the air, I can have a conversation with that photograph of a performance, which it's funny to me, I think, of all of the older, the classic marble statues, the fountains, and the kind of literal jump to a human body in the photo. And there's a kind of conversation going on there between things I know and how this artist has refigured them. Can I have that kind of conversation with this work? What does this mind which has created this know about what is a mind which knows millions of photographs of the world, but which has never experienced the world through fingers, touch, smell, other things? Is that an interesting mind with which to interact?
Asking the same question. So, is this art? That was a very interesting response. I think I kind of have two separate answers to that. So on the one hand, I think it is important that we don't let everything be art, because then art becomes meaningless. And so, I mean, sometimes when I teach computational creativity, I have students who would say, what if I create a program that spits out random strings of zeros and ones and then says that it's art? Does that make it art? Well, hopefully not. But at the same time, there's a long history for resistance of computer or any kind of mechanical art. Creativity in particular has been a moving target. If you look at time before the Industrial Revolution, artists and creativity was all about trying to imitate great masters and imitating nature. These were sort of the main topics, the main things that were considered important for creativity. But then through the Industrial Revolution and later, especially right now, and computers can do so much, we've been redefining what creativity is in order to make sure that it stays within our domains. So we want to stay sort of the owners of creativity, and we're willing to change what it means to be creative to make sure that we stay the main creative beings on this planet. And that's a very, it's kind of a rigged game. In this game, computers can never succeed in creating anything creative, anything that we would consider art. I think in order to be honest about it, and we need to realize how selfish we are about, how careful we are about sharing what it means to be creative and sharing what it means to create art, and allow computers to have their own form of art that might be somewhat different from ours. And deep dream, these images, which actually, the reverse image recognition is one of the best examples of computer art, because they create a kind of art that would be very difficult for humans to make. I think I'll stop for now.
Yeah, I feel very similar about maybe there's a different definition for robot art. Humans have a very hard time all agreeing on what is art. So I don't think we can all agree. If there's 100 people in one room, we're going to have completely different subjective visions of, is this thing I'm looking at art? But the most common sort of definition that we have is this is an object that has an aesthetic, it's something that looks good towards the human or makes you feel better, is usually our definition of art. And humans have so many ways of creating art. So I could put a brush on paper, I could use algorithms and a ruler and make something very geometric. That is also something that a computer or robot can do. So is it the outcome or is it the process is really what I'm having an issue with deciding if a robot can be creative. Because I think we can create the same outcome, but with normal AI, the robot is really taking the knowledge of a human, this programming algorithms, input, having input create this output, if this, then do this, for doing the actual physical work of creating art. So that's almost using our creativity through their mechanism. What I want to see is the robot using AGI coming up with its own intelligent meaning of what art is. So when I get to see a robot that will actually act upon the question of, if I was to ask the robot, can you please create a piece of artwork for me? Like, are you feeling creative today? Can you make a piece of art? And if the robot can respond, then that's where I feel it actually has a creative soul within it.
If I could respond to that, the closest thing to this that I'm aware of, which doesn't perfectly represent what you're looking for, but there is work by Simon Colton. It's called The Painting Fool. And the painting, one of the many, many things that it can do is draw portraits. And it has a mood, which it figures out by reading recent newspaper articles. And sometimes it would tell you that it's very upset and it's not going to draw you today. So it has a little bit of that built in.
Yeah, so my question, I would also ask the opposite question. Do we overrate human creativity? Okay, simple example. I see a beautiful sunset and I write a poem. Who should take credit for the poem? Me or the sunset? See, it's easy to say, oh, I programmed the robot to do that art, or I programmed the neural network to do that. But isn't the sunset and everything else around me and everything that happened, isn't that the program that is running in my brain and causing me to write a poem?
Right, so we have that discussion within the art world, and I constantly have arguments with my cousin, who's also coming from an art background, where it's like there's certain artists who it's the final outcome, and they have an idea, a concept that they tell a team of people that creates it for them. So they're not actually putting anything on paper. They have a team that's doing the process. And it has an outcome which is aesthetically pleasing towards humans. People buy it. But is that person creative? Is that person the artist if they're not physically doing it?
See, I don't remember if it was Meredith or somebody else. When I had a similar objection, somebody from the art world, maybe it was you, replied, when will the machine be able to appreciate art? So again, switching the context, it's not only about the fact that somebody makes art, there's also the fact that thousands, millions of people appreciate the art. But even that, it's just a matter of time. Somebody will make a neural network that actually has an opinion about aesthetics.
That has been done in many ways, perhaps, again, not to the degree that we'd like. But in computational creativity, the concept of evaluation is really central. So it's, if a system just generates, it just creates art, but it can't evaluate it, it can't determine if it's good or rank different pieces of art, it's not considered good enough according to the computational creativity community. And so there are many ways in which systems rate their own work. So I have a system that creates melodies, and it evaluates them as well. And that makes the system better, but it also kind of conceptually makes it more interesting.
Could you say just a little bit more about the basis of the evaluation?
Well, there are many different approaches, but in our very specific case, we have a system, it's called Alicia, and I'll talk more about it at 4 o'clock today, but you give it lyrics, and it gives you melodies to which you can sing these lyrics. And our particular evaluation has 2 parts. So one part of the evaluation is how likely that sequence was to have been generated by our system. So you can imagine, whether it's a computer system or a human, let's say there are certain things that you do that are rare and certain things you do that are common, right? So if you compose, you could once in a while compose something that's very unusual for you, maybe unusually bad or unusually good, but unusual. So our system has kind of a formal machine learning way of evaluating how likely it was to create certain melodies. And that's balanced, in our case, with how varied the melody is. So because we train it on pop music, it often generates extremely boring melodies, like exactly the same note over and over again. So we punish for that. So it's, we basically look for melodies that are typical, balanced with varied, and it tends to correlate fairly well with how humans would rate these melodies.
So if we were to go back to the idea of having a conversation with this entity which is making this work, is it expressing the idea that it doesn't want to be punished? Is it drawing on some kind of difference in electrical potential at some point in the root? What kind of things could we say that it's telling us in the choices that it makes?
You mean choices that we can extract from it, or that it explicitly shares its own thought process? Just trying to understand.
I would say the latter.
The latter, okay. So my particular system is not designed, so work in computational creativity can have many different objectives. So my objective is actually for it to be a collaborator to help us create music. I don't focus as much on giving the impression that you're dealing with a human. Like it's more like utility-based. But there are systems that do. There are systems out there that the Painting Full in particular really focuses, the painting system that I mentioned that can draw portraits of you, and sometimes refuses to. There's really a lot of focus on giving this impression that you're dealing with a human, that Painting Full can explain itself, can give context for its own paintings, kind of trying to simulate a human. But I think that brings us to a really important point. Should we be trying to imitate humans? Is that what's really important here? This artwork doesn't try to imitate humans, and I think it's actually a lot more impressive than a lot of computer art because of that.
Yeah, let me tell you. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Well, I want to go to some, maybe perhaps the word conversation is a little confusing, because I wasn't actually thinking so much of personifying the entity with which you were working, but I really want to know. I mean, there is something, a set of sounds which has been put together by this entity. What can I understand about what we might call its experience from what it has given me? Is it possible for me to communicate, let's say, this microphone, with some completely different kind of entity which is not human? Can I get that?
Okay, so in my particular system, if I should clarify that first, there are some ways in which the collaboration takes place. They're not as broad and varied as you would with a human collaborator. But for example, the system gives you its ranked melodies. You can then pick a few of them and say, please give me melodies similar to these. Or you can say, I like the rhythms you're picking, but please change the pitches, or vice versa. So there are very specific mechanisms by which you can do this interaction, and they're limited. But they do create, the people who've used it do get a sense of collaborating with the agent. And of course, it also helps people who can't write melodies gain this skill through this collaboration. And I think your bigger vision of having a more, I guess, extensive, a more comprehensive collaboration is one of the main goals of computational creativity, so it's something that I think would be wonderful to see in the future.
What is the negative feedback that you give that robot?
Negative feedback?
You talked about punishing if they do something you don't like.
So I guess I never really thought about it as negative feedback. I thought about it as more like positive. We like, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. So we tell it, there are specific features where you say, I like this melody, but please give me other rhythm options.
Okay.
Yeah. And one thing that we could be doing that you do see in other systems is to change the inspiring side, to change the data that it's learning from, to focus on the melodies that the human user likes. And that way it could also learn over time. So that's something you see in some other systems.
So, to me, it really does feel like a human interaction. Yeah, it feels quite human, because you're giving input as to what you like, and it's responding.
Yeah, so let me tell you why I personally think this is a very important topic, not just for the world of art. I think there's a reason if evolution eventually created brains that are creative. Art is just one case of creativity, but we are creative all the time. Like right now, we have to have a dialogue. More importantly, when you cross the street in Tehran or in Cairo, you need a lot of creativity. People will not stop at the red light. People will not obey rules. Creativity is widespread. In fact, my question for Lisa is, how can you trust a robot that doesn't have creativity? Because if you just, the self-driving car, I was behind the Google car in Mountain View, and somebody had parked improperly. There was no parking, so it parked and blocked the lane. The Google car didn't know what to do. It was just stopping there, and I was getting really upset. You can't even honk. Well, you can because there's a guy sitting next to it. But the reason is that machine has no creativity. It can't think that in this case, yes, you're going, the wrong way.
Yeah.
So I think in real life, creativity is extremely important. And art is just one facet of human creativity. The one that we put in the museum because Meredith said this is a work of art. But in general, we need creativity. And when I see these robots doing something that is getting more and more sophisticated, at UC Berkeley, I saw this robot, Peter Bill, has this robot that folds towels. Picks up the towel and folds it. Picks up the towel and folds it. But my question is, what if the towel is a hole? What if the towel is still wet? It wasn't dried properly. That robot is useless, in my opinion.
That's a very interesting topic, especially with the car. And I feel like with that, it's sort of, it's literally street smarts. And I feel like from the robotic programming standpoint, they just weren't given enough input. So they weren't given all of the different variables that could happen, so they don't know how to respond. And the way you're describing it, yes, it sounds like robots are pretty limited creatively, because a lot of things are very set in stone and black and white for robots, or at least the ones that I've seen. Ones that we relate with in real life, like the examples you've said, where if they see something that they have not been told about, if they've not been programmed to see with the robot sensors that they have, they don't necessarily know how to react. And that's another difference between humans and robots, where robots are created sometimes not in the human form, sometimes they are, but they're in a human world. And the world is created so that we can go around, we can walk easily, we can open doors. Robots have different sensors, and they have to navigate in this really complex world that's not made for them.
I think this also brings up another interesting topic of whether our creativity is general, whether it's even a person. If you're a creative person, are you creative in everything? Or if it's a domain-specific entity, and there are different opinions about it. But even in humans, there's a lot of evidence that creativity is largely domain-specific. If you're a very creative visual artist, it doesn't make you a creative musician if you don't have the corresponding training. And in robots, we really see that to the extreme, because they often get training in a more limited way than humans do. And so, of course, their creativity doesn't transfer as much. Now, if we focus on creating robots that have more general creativity, I think we could make some progress. And there is some work in robotics that tries to imitate humans instead of trying to achieve a specific task.
Well, there's a difference between robots and neural nets, right, in terms of what we're talking about. So in some way, it seems to me like we're dancing around a question of the relationship between embodiment and creativity. That I think a lot of what, as humans, we experience as creativity is information that we're processing from other senses than vision, which can be things that we don't think of as thoughts, but they're sensations that are come together in a spectrum of experience. And the robot has the body that can have the experience of, oh, this doorknob is way above my head or something. It might not have the neural net, which can perhaps learn or perhaps make a leap from one experience to another at some point. So, but beyond that, I think of our bodies have a lot to do with desiring and wanting. Like, our minds can see two people in front of us, and maybe we just respond to those two people differently, not because we know different things about them, but on a kind of visceral level. And it's that kind of visceral wanting or body information that I think has a whole lot to do with what we call art in particular.
I actually agree very much, especially as a musician myself. I share a lot of these views. But I think one thing we need to ask ourselves, and I'd love to hear what you think about it, is kind of a chicken and egg question. Do we consider these things that robots don't have, these more emotional and harder to describe aspects, so important to creativity because they really are so central to creativity, or because robots don't have them? So there is this incentive to emphasize things that are uniquely human, which keeps shrinking as robots can do more and more. So what do you think? Do you think that this is a reaction to the fact that now we have computers that are so intelligent, that we're putting less emphasis on certain skills and more on these more subjective things which are harder to give to a robot?
Well,
I'm still processing. I think a lot of times, like, maybe humans would learn a lot from looking at robots. You know, emotions have a lot of issues that come along with them. If we could block them, humans would have a totally different life experience. But robots, as long as they have this intelligence, it seems like the finer skills that they have, the more they know how to evolve and work around this human world, that they will start to gain this sort of human emotion. Because right now it's very, they're getting this input, and I mean, I guess I just want to bring it back to your point about an embodiment. The robot has these, if it's physical, it has these sensors, right? And so that's the only input it has. So if it's just a neural net in a computer with no body, no other input, how is it learning and getting these emotions? Like, does it have a microphone? Does it listen to us and learn from human speech? Like, how would that neural net without a body get anything similar to what humans have inside? Because it's a totally different entity. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, I might just kind of put parallel to what you just said. I in thinking about this panel, kind of realized that at least with regards to art, I do think that it's an extraordinarily human thing. And the art that I would be interested, and in that way, yes, I agree with what you said. I'm defining a human type of experience with the continual need to mesh body and mind and environment as part of the core of art. But I'm really interested with what kind of voluntary activity for fun a artificial, synthetic, whatever you want to call it, entity would come up with, whether or not we called it art with a capital A. Because I think that would tell us a lot about a kind of, to us, alien experience of the world that would be very interesting.
that is a wonderful question. Like, I can't wait to see a robot that has a hobby, right? That is like, I think that's what the panel is really getting at. Like, we know we create robots for the most part. I haven't really seen one that creates itself to do a certain job. Maybe that's we want it to have emotions, so we try and make it have emotions. We want it to build a car, so we make it build a car. But where is that robot that has its own hobby and has a passion on the side?
Okay, this is very, very interesting. So what if somehow it was possible to create a robot that had emotions? Okay, they come up with some kind of completely different technology, and for all intents and purposes, they had emotions exactly like us. Do you think that the art world might redefine once again what it means to be an artist and what art means?
Well, the art world is always redefining it, so I think the answer has got to be yes. But I do see the point of your question. I would have to say that I can't give an honest answer to your question, in part because I question I think if you had an embodiment where the emotions were exactly the same, you actually wouldn't have a human.
Well, let's say something was missing. Let's say they could only do positive emotions but couldn't do negative ones. Would we then just kind of draw a circle around the stuff that's still human, saying, okay, now only the negative emotions matter because that remains uniquely human? That's sort of what, if you look at art historically, that's exactly what you're seeing in visual art. That's also what you see in music and drama, how in the dramatic arts in particular, it used to be all about doing things right. Remember old Shakespeare? I can't quite do a good imitation, but you were supposed to kind of have the same tone and the same intonation. And then around, a little bit later, a little bit after the visual arts were evolved, in the early 1900s, the Russian artist who redefined drama to become all about having real experiences on stage. And so he changed what it meant to be an actor, very much to stay away from stuff that's so easy for machines to do. So I think we're going to be continuously, it's a moving target. We make sure that robots don't satisfy the definitions because we keep changing the definitions.
I guess I agree that the definitions always change, but I don't know that I agree that it's about asserting a human priority. I mean, I think that the reasons that the definitions for art kind of grow and wobble and expand is because the environment is always in motion. And art is as I said, for me, it's a dynamic exchange. Therefore, it never is, it's not a stable state.
I think you're absolutely right that there's a lot of factors in play, and I think that has to be pointed out. But there are other ways in which humans like to protect our creative work to be just ours. And another kind of the best other example I know, other than keeping art away from machines, is keeping art away from animals. Animals exhibit a wide range of creative behavior. Some of it is actually quite artistic. Some of it is very intelligent. And yet we like to attribute it to instinct and kind of other descriptions that really diminish animal creativity in a very similar way in which we diminish computer creativity. What do you think?
That's actually a good point. I'm trying to remember now, but I saw it's a spider web. Luckily, I didn't meet the spider. But the spider web was this big, and it was a work of art. If nobody had told me this was made by a spider, I would have looked for the artist. Yeah, so is that art?
Yes, I am willing to agree. I am, for my definition of art, we can include many different kinds of living beings. And I think there's a kind of art which is defined by the market, and in which case you could say people do buy and sell elephant paintings. I mean, I think that's not so, that's interesting only so far. But I think decentering humans is very important. We do not want the Anthropocene. We don't want that. That's not good for us, and it's not good for other living beings. And so I think opening up to a definition of art that would include other kinds of beings could be very important.
I was also going to talk about the elephant art, because...
Hold the thought. I just wanted to say, if anybody in the audience have questions or comments, if you can line up in front of the microphone, because I cannot see raised hands. I have a strong light in front.
Yeah, so it's the spiderweb example is something that's functional, but elephants actually do create flower paintings and stuff like that, and that is definitely not functional. So they do have what we would call an artistic, like they have creativity and they create art. But I don't think we can define art and it's just entirely subjective. I don't think we'll ever, as a human whole, have a definition.
Yeah, hi. As I'm listening to this discussion, the word intention keeps coming into my mind. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
So this, for some reason, reminds me of a musical that was partially computer generated. It was called Beyond the Fence, and it was released in Britain just last year. And I was listening to a panel about it, and one of the panelists pointed out that there are things that are much harder for a computer to do than it is for us, and vice versa. And actually, one of the most difficult things, which I think is closely related to intention, was coming up with the main concept for the play. So essentially answering the question of what is this play about? What is kind of the main idea behind this play? And so they had to take a very different approach. They had to write a special program that focused on that focused on finding the purpose of the play and kind of the main tagline. Yeah, so intention in a broader sense, perhaps that could be addressed by.
I think it stems back to when I was speaking about the function of the robot. So each robot usually is programmed or built to have one function for the human or a couple, and that is the intent, but is yet to be seen if a robot creates its own intent. And that, I think, would be creativity.
I would go along with that. I think what I said about the importance of desire, or the physical, is a corollary of the idea of intention. You have a wish, an intention to do one thing over another, a preference, and those kinds of fully experiential, like including thoughts, but also including sensations and history in the body and things like that, is, if that were to develop in a robotic being, that would be a really fabulous moment.
Just one final comment here. I think that intent is very closely related to consciousness here. Consciousness is again something kind of outside that beings that are not humans, or at least beings that are in any way robots or computer systems, we don't believe that they have any sort of consciousness. And so again, I think we need to ask ourselves, is it necessary for an artist to have consciousness? Are those two things, do those two things have to go together?
John?
It's a very interesting panel. The term art is, as I think someone said, it's a very blunt tool. It covers so many different kinds of practices that people engage in together that it's, until you can't really have the discussion of, is this art, is that art, until you set up a definition of what art is, and they're not all going to agree. However, that said, I think one of the things, the comment about a robot having a hobby is very interesting because it does connect up with the question of intention. But the other thing that runs throughout various forms of artistic behavior, some of which are very related to state power, some of which are very related to, say, churches and religious practices. So our definition of art today is a very specific one, even the many ones we have, that don't line up very well with even what we think of as, quote, this culture, unquote, going back, say, 400 or 500 years. However, most of these practices, as I think Meredith suggested at the beginning, have, there's a receiving end as well as the making end. And if we spend most of our time talking about the making end, the creating end, whether it's a robot or a spider or a human, we miss one of the key things, which is that art is, even if it's a person making something for him or herself or their self to experience, it's a two-channel operation. So what I want to know is, when do neural networks or robots or spiders or whatever start making art for each other, paying no attention to us, make things that we can't recognize as art because it doesn't fit our definition at all, but it fits theirs, and they may not be able to communicate it to us. Now that, it seems to me, would be a slightly different discussion, which would be very interesting. Right now, I don't see a way for that to happen, but who knows?
Yeah.
But it has to be, I mean, I think art, fundamentally, the behaviors throughout a range of different cultures and types of practices are principally social.
Want to go first? Go. We have 7 minutes.
Okay, sure. So this reminds me of this work done at University of British Columbia on what are called muse bots. So there are little bots that each create music, and they interact together to create ensembles. So it's robot-to-robot art. So there are many ways in which computers can interact in the art world. My favorite, perhaps, is human and robot together as two collaborators. But there is work emerging when it's robots working together to make art, and muse bots being one of the nicest examples. And they're not even very complicated robots. They each create something like a drum line or a melody, but then they coordinate together to make sure that it works out well as a combined work of art.
Okay, so my comment doesn't answer the question. I wouldn't even try. But one level up, okay? If somebody asks me what is the state of neural networks, let's focus on neural networks because I don't want to go through all the possible kinds of automation. And I would say, to simplify really the story, there's two levels. To me, there's two types of creativity. One is the wow moment, and one is the ha-ha moment. There's a moment where you see something, you go, wow, that's impressive. There's a moment when you see something and you start laughing, it's so stupid. Now, the wow moment is sort of happening. My friend Steve was sitting there, would probably agree that, you know, that we have been surprised by what neural networks have been doing, and progress has been faster than we expected. The problem is the ha-ha moment. At the previous last festival, Peter Norvig of Google gave a very fun presentation. Because usually they show you the success stories, okay? The machine was so good at recognizing that this is two people playing frisbee in a park. But they don't usually show you the mistakes. Now, the mistakes that the neural network made makes you laugh. Okay, the famous one is the gorilla, right? African American was recognized as a gorilla by the machine. But there's funnier ones where the computer totally missed the point of what the scene was, and when we see that, we start laughing. Now, when will we have a machine that looks at another machine making that mistakes and starts laughing? So there's definitely still a lot that separates us from machine creativity, because we can laugh at the mistake that the machine made. And that's something that I don't know to frame computationally. Okay? It's much easier to frame computationally, how do you write a Shakespeare's beautiful plays? I don't know if we will ever do it, but you can. But framing the fact this is really stupid, in a sense, artificial stupidity is more difficult than artificial intelligence.
Yeah, humor is a very difficult field, but you know, one day we'll get there, I think.
Final comment? We have a couple minutes. Drew, can we plug your computer while we are making final comments?
Yes. You know, building on what was just said, I think that, at least in most humor, I think that there's an underlying element of ambiguity. There's a wonderful, it was Jon Stewart maybe talking about satire, where he said satire is a very moral thing because it encodes the idea that things could be different or should be different. And I think humor in general, there's a sense of doubleness and ambiguity. So in a way, perhaps what this notion of the kinds of things that we're talking about aren't good at ambiguity yet, but that there might, as John was suggesting, that perhaps there's some kind of art or intention or creation, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, that would come out of this incredibly rigorous binary consciousness. That's interesting. I think that's an interesting idea. I don't know, as the idea that there's something that we really could not understand, I think that kind of binariness may be it.
Yeah, I love that last question. Again, art is so subjective for humans. Something with robots, it's almost alien. They may be giving each other art and we don't know about it, or we don't see it because we don't have the same humor or intelligence or sensors. But maybe, you know, there are robots that do speak to each other, and maybe that code, that RF, you know, IR, that makes them talk to each other, Bluetooth, maybe that programming is code, or you know, or is art, I mean, who knows, right? But what we think is art is possibly different from what robots think is art. So I guess I agree.
That's a good final sentence. Very good. Thank you very much.